Welcome to Girl in the Gov, the podcast,
where our goal is to make politics more accessible and less intimidating.
The show features an interview with an expert in the political field, walking us through the many cues we have about politics, civics, government, and more.
By providing civic education in the places we are, on our phones, and in the language we speak. And yes, we know we say like a lot.
It's kind of the point, because politics needed a rebrand. Welcome back to Girl in the Gov, the podcast. Welcome back after our cute little break, summer recess, some would say. Mm-hmm. It's funny because I quite literally was like, I'm tuning out from the world this week, which I did, and I'm so glad I did, especially after the horrendous news of the week before and the Friday right before 4th of July. But one thing I did come back to was the weird cocaine thing in the White House. Did you see this?
I did. And I was similarly kind of
is the story there?
Off the grid. And I did see the headline like pop up on my phone, but I didn't like dig into it until after. But
same.
Essentially, this is apparently what happened is that Secret Service does sweeps of the West Wing, which smart, good, happy they do. Of like, right. You know, there's tours that come through looking for anything that could be suspicious, dangerous, etc., whatever. In one of their
You mean the tour that we didn't get invited to?
Don't get me started.
Just kidding. Sorry to interrupt.
Well, in the sweep, they find this little like bag with like some white stuff in it. Now, if this were like hanging, like, I guess, you know, on the streets, a club, a restaurant, I don't know, whatever, I think the assumption would be that it's Coke. But
I was going to say, there's a lot of cocaine jokes that can be made right now that we'll hold in.
So many.
Was it found in the bathroom? What room was it in?
There are so many questions. I've even like visually like thought about it too. I'm like, where would this have like been? Like, the wheels have turned, let me tell you. But because it was in the White House, there's of course the question of like, what actually is it? Like, like, is it anthrax? Is it something else? And I totally like, so first I think it was like scare, like, what is this? Then it was confirmed that it was Coke. Then rumors swirled that was it Hunter Biden, because Hunter Biden was in the White House. But then that was like coming from like the right. And then schedules came out that like he wasn't there at like the time that this would have like been his. I also
the thing is like, that would have just been like least of my worries about Hunter Biden, you know?
Least of my worries as well. And in addition, and this is don't do drugs, kids, but like learning that someone in politics
does cocaine, you're like, wow, shocker.
They also drink water. It's like there's this meme that's like, I always mess it up. And it's like when you're an adult and you find out that like everyone does coke and like eats something specific. It's like very much that I think in like certain industries. Not this is making us sound like we do a lot of coke.
I do not. I swear on my life, I do not.
On God, on God.
But
nope.
No, it's really funny you raise that point because I feel like the political
Zach's
space.
Zach's gonna kill us. This is the
yeah, gosh. No, it's so funny you raise that point because I feel like when people think of the political space, they're like, oh, like they probably don't like swear or drink or like do anything. But little does anyone know, like it's one of the most crude spaces of them all. You know,
I agree with that. I also think that
heavy drinking, heavy swearing,
1,000%. Heavy emphasis on the swearing. I also just think that it's a high stress industry. It's and long hours. It reminds me of like the finance industry in a lot of ways. I think it has a very like old boys club atmosphere to it, similar to finance. And like if you've ever dated, known, or talked or walked near a finance dude, you know that it's like a drinking, coke, and cursing culture. So that was good.
Yeah.
Wait, that was so good.
That was fun.
I don't know who
all
wants
the C's.
To use that makes sure. All the C's.
Yeah.
I haven't had a creative stroke of genius in a while, and I'm just really happy it happened now.
I shockingly have not seen any cocaine in my experiences in the political space or in any after-hour situations, and I worked on a campaign. But I'm sure it's out there, and I feel as though it's especially in those kind of
it's more of like it just doesn't surprise spaces. Me. It was almost just one of those scenarios that where I like laughed, where I was like, this, of course. Like,
But it is back to the thing. It's like literally
that's
like a part of adulthood is just realizing that like cocaine is everywhere and everyone does it except for us. And I really hope people think we're like, don't think we're being sarcastic, because I swear on my life, like I really don't. I swear on Biggie's life. There it is. Now everyone knows for sure. But yeah, funny story that I didn't expect out of this week. And I think there were some more scandally type stories.
There is another one, and I have been dying to get your thoughts on this because I
honestly don't. I probably don't know it. I literally don't know what happened. So
tell me you didn't read the newsletter without telling me. Thank you very much, Madison. But it's fine. It's in your inbox. It's hanging out. It's whatever. Also available at our Beehive. So go to the link in the episode. Go to the link in our bio. You know the deal, and then sign up for it too. Get it to your inbox. Digital front door. Yada yada yada. However, the scandal that I wanted to talk about was Marjorie Taylor Greene getting booted from the Freedom Caucus, the House Freedom Caucus, and like no one telling her.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like I guess she got like voted off the island essentially. And no one's been able to like contact her or like get a response from her. Oh. So super weird.
She's been exiled.
And literally exiled. You know, when like a celebrity decides that they're going to break up with whoever they're dating, and instead of telling the person that they're dating, they just send it to the tabloid first, and the person finds out that they're being dumped via the tabloid. I think this happened on, what was that? The real estate show? Selling
Sunset.
Yeah, like that's what it reminds me of like they, like, instead of like breaking up with her, like giving her a call and being like, hey, MTG crazy pants, like it's over between us. So sorry. Or let's meet and greet and talk it through.
And I feel like the infighting within that caucus and within that like even smaller group of the Republican Party as a whole, especially House Republicans, the infighting and just all of the drama that probably ensues within that specific group is something I would quite literally pay all my money to witness. And yeah, I'm just sure it could be bigger and better than any Housewives show. Anything. Like
it could be amazing.
Because I have my theories too about the love triangles that are probably happening within that as well. Gates, Lauren Boebert. So those are just, I have a lot of theories about that whole group and the drama that I'm sure ensues within it, beyond just the politics, of course, because that could be its own show.
1,000%. You know who actually does like a good roundup of some of the drama is Roll Call. They have I think it's weekly, but like I think it's like a week in review, and they put together like it's almost like a little YouTube video situation, but they post it on their like general site, and it goes through like different like, oh my God, WTF type moments, or like moments of note. Like some of them are like just funny, haha. Oh my God, Jersey Housewives moment. Funny, haha. Okay. Anyways, long story short, I think there's the makings of it. Like someone at Roll Call, us, a Bravo producer, we could do magic.
100%. I mean, there really should be another like even just political like drama out there these days. Like what's it called? House of Cards. Like I never like all of those shows. I feel like there was like a surgence of like political kind of drama shows, or even like Veep. Like there needs to be.
I still need to watch that.
Yeah, there needs to be another one of those in this era, because there's not one, I don't think. And and it can be based on like real events, but obviously having some like Hollywood writers in the room to like really spice it up and make it dramatic would be. There's art like, but it's like how SNL's already has their content written for them. Like a show like that would already have theirs as well.
1,000%. Like why differ from the script? However, this did just remind me of something that I wanted to tell you, because you know how I've been on this like NCIS binge and like down this rabbit hole. But the episodes I'm watching circled like 2011, and one of the characters has this like very like con man-esque dad, and he's like leaving his son, and he's like, his son's like, oh wait, did you get a ticket to like the airport? He's like, oh, I ran into Donald Trump. He said if I like meet him at Reagan at like noon, I got a flight or whatever. And it was just like interesting to me because
Trump had some other cameos, I feel like, back in the
day. Like Home Alone.
Is there a Gossip Girl one or something? Oh, maybe. I think it was in Sex and the City, actually. I recently watched an episode. I think he was in Sex and the City, like early seasons, like maybe one or two. Yeah.
But just funny. Like at first I was thinking, I was like, wow, it's so weird that he had like this pop culture relevance in a way. And then like later on in the show, like Michelle Obama gets a cameo, and I was like this more than the like Donald Trump mention.
I mean,
but
it was
regardless,
before his political
I think it was
era, right? Yeah.
Oh, this was the other thing. Connecting to Scandal, celebrity, and Donald Trump is Guy Fieri and like Mike Wahlberg and like all these like other just like
Mike
dudes.
Or Mark? The actor? The hot actor?
I think the actor. I think the hot actor.
That's Mark. Did you say Mike? I don't know.
I don't know. They both sound the same to me. But the actory one, the hotter one.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's an unhot one.
No, there's whoever the hot just one. Marky Mark Wahlberg. He's hot. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I guess they've been like showing face and giving like thumbs up to Trump. And so there was like response online. Yeah, no, he lost his hotness immediately. Hot card revokes you later, see you never. Gross ick. Bye. Like you and Jonah Hill star. Thank you. Anyways, there was like backlash naturally to like the support and like normalization of Trump with these like celebrities. And granted, like Guy Fieri, not shocked. Like he's giving Sarah Palin Kid Rock vibes. But like it's just interesting that these celebs try and like bop in or like, oh, like let's be like little Trumplicans. Like
yeah.
I just don't understand.
It's
like
funny just
even if
you're the audacity, you know.
The audacity.
And speaking of, I quite literally had two guys I used to talk to expose themselves as MAGA.
No.
Last week. Yeah, it was a lot. In fact, one was wearing a MAGA hat. So
no.
Yeah, I told him, take that thing off or I'm throwing it in the barbecue. He didn't. So
that thing would combust from the chemicals. Combust.
I just like, why has this happened to me?
That's like next
they know where I stand, and they always just keep it a little secret for a long time.
That is crazy.
No, it's really annoying.
You get the real like smoke and mirrors people. You know what I mean? Like
it's so twisted. It's sick
and you get
twisted.
like the Trumpy ones. Like you don't even get the like. And I'm not defending.
No, I don't even get the like fiscally fiscally conservative, socially liberal. Nope. I get like real closeted Trumpers, and it's unfair. It's sick and it's twisted, and I'm over it happening to me.
Do we think this is because you like are into like the burly like?
No, like they're not even like burly. No, they're like honestly kind of pretty boys, and it's sick and it's twisted. There's nothing else to say about it. I don't want to talk about it.
That's
yeah. So
that's brutal.
Anyways, but speaking of like con man scandals, douchebags, we're talking a lot about George Santos today. We're talking about it with our amazing friend Zak. Zak finally is coming on the podcast, and he's running against George Santos, and we couldn't be more excited to see this shake out.
Also, like everyone's heard us talk about Zak 5 million times.
If you were at our event in New York, you met
oh
him.
Oh my god, yeah, duh. And like literally, like we'll be like, oh, Zak will know that. Zak, pretty much just like fill in the blank. Zak's everywhere. We even probably mentioned that in our interview with him. So yeah, Zak's the best. Zak's running against George Santos. He's running for the Democratic primary in New York. He's also the founder of The Next 50, which is an organization that works to get young people elected, progressives elected. Super awesome. They're like killing it. So we love to see it. Love to have Zak on the show. So without further ado, here's Zak.
Before we continue with the conversation, we wanted to let you know about another podcast you might enjoy.
Are you desperate for American leaders who are ready to meet the challenges of our time? An Honorable Profession podcast brought to you by the team at The New Deal is here to help.
Every week, the podcast introduces listeners to a future game changer in American politics. Past guests include Pete Buttigieg, Senator Alex Padilla, Mandela Barnes, and Mallory McMorrow, national figures who got their start in state and local office and as New Deal leaders.
The podcast puts a spotlight on the rising stars who are working to build better communities across our nation, as well as the innovative ideas these officials are testing to address climate change, preserve democracy, and face down the other challenges of our time.
From fare-free transit in Kansas City to renewable biogas in Lincoln, their guests tell us how they're implementing forward-thinking policies to restore trust in government and rebuild hope for all Americans.
Tune in to learn more. You can listen to An Honorable Profession everywhere podcasts are found. Zak. Welcome to Girl in the Gov, the podcast.
About time.
Yeah, it is about time.
Like, only just takes you running for Congress to get on the show. It's, it's those little things.
You guys play hard to get. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's the prerequisite. Sorry.
Look, we're good at a game, and regardless, we got here. And you have such an interesting political background. You're the founder of the Next 50. You've been in politics for a while. You are also like a man about town. There's not a political event we have not seen you at. A person that doesn't know you. I could go to a random party, like not related to politics, and someone knows you. I swear to God, it's like 6 degrees of New York or 6 degrees of Jewish. I don't even know sometimes.
I also know Kevin Bacon for what it's worth. So
there you go. I mean, you know everyone, and it's awesome. And we have to talk about how like all these things kind of come together. So maybe let's start with talking about how you got interested in politics, how you started like, making all these, connections, and maybe connections like the wrong word, but, sort of like these moments of understanding politics and moving through them. What is this political journey like for you?
Well, I hate to bring us away from a moment of levity, but truth be told, I grew up in New York, just outside of this city, and the most formative moment of my life was 9/11. And, seeing what transpired that day, but even more so what happened in the days after, where my neighbors, my family members, et cetera, like went to ground zero to help serve and rebuild New York. As a second grader, 7 years old at the time, feeling relatively helpless, I knew that when I had an opportunity to help and serve, I wanted to do so. And it was seeing that in the wake of 9/11. And then now fast forward, 20 years or so, I actually on 9/11, I went for a walk with my father, and he explained to me what was happening that day. And then you fast forward 20 years, and the world was about to shut down all around us. And I went on a walk, and as I was coming back home, my last slice of pizza before the pandemic really shut down the world, I passed a father explaining to his son what was happening. And I think the thing that both of those moments share is that it was very easy in both moments to be consumed by a politics of fear. And on my journey, I've always tried to find a way to channel a politics of hope. And, my community in the wake of the pandemic had felt like public education, public safety, and the economy, all their way of life was under threat. And so unfortunately, folks channeled that politics of fear to voting for someone who they didn't know at all, who ended up becoming a serial liar, who claimed he was Jewish, claimed he had relatives who died in the Holocaust. The most astounding one of all was that he said he was captain of his college volleyball team. I can't understand that one. And it was that seeing my community in crisis. And when I realized I had 2 choices, one was to run away, and 2 was to help and serve. And so, sometimes the moment doesn't choose you. Sometimes you don't choose the moment. Sometimes the moment chooses you. And that's where we are right now. And I'm so excited to be running for New York's 3rd congressional district.
Yeah, love it. Well, we will definitely get into the George Santos of it all and the campaign and everything. But before we do, we want to also like highlight the Next 50 and what you've been doing with that work. And kind of, can you explain to everyone, like, what does this org do? What's its mission? Like, what is it solving for?
Yeah, well, look, 50 years ago, conservatives came up with a plan to win. And by all measures, they've won. I think nothing highlights that more than the Dobbs decision that came down this past June. So a year ago this month, actually. And a big part of that plan was an investment in young people. In fact, we at the Next 50 don't believe it's a coincidence that over 50% of those in Congress who are 50 years old and under are Republicans like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, Matt Gaetz, and of course, my home Congressman, George Santos. And we believe that in a pluralistic movement, it's important that we invest in the diversity that makes up our coalition. And so at the Next 50, we back 50 leaders, 50 years old and under, primarily in swing districts and states across the country. Last cycle, we were the #1 PAC investing in young political leaders and had an 80% success rate in some of the most competitive districts and states, defeating extreme MAGA Republicans everywhere. And well, I guess, I just never really imagined that I'd have the opportunity to, or the need to do that in my hometown. And so I'm really excited by the work the Next 50 is doing and continues to do. And I remain a senior advisor. there, but sometimes you have this opportunity to live out the mission that you represent. Last thing I'll say here is I've always really loved investing in young leaders and talent before anyone else sees it. And it's been a real privilege to do that and invest in leaders across the country. To now have the opportunity to be one of those leaders is actually teaching me so much about the experience of the leaders I've invested in and have had themselves. And it'll make me a better supporter of them. I say to everybody in running for office, there's nobody who is going to do more to invest in the local, state, and national Democratic Party than me. And that's a big reason why I've stepped up to serve.
Totally. Because it's like, how like the cookie crumbles, you're actually like seeing it from like the inside out, which is just like a perspective. Like you can learn, you can hear conversations all you want, but until sometimes you do it yourself, there's just something a little bit always like missing of it. You haven't felt the feelings,
Craziest thing is on the Next 50 team, I'm the only one who hasn't done it. There is our political director is a former state representative from Michigan who flipped a district red to blue. We have two other folks who have worked in some of the most competitive districts in the states and won consequential Senate and congressional races. I'm the only one who hasn't actually done that. I've been investing in young leaders my whole life, but I've never actually done the work of running in a competitive race before. And so now I'm doing that work, the irony of being the founder of the organization. But I think...
I think to that point, though, it's sometimes... as much as being in it, you have a certain perspective. Sometimes being on the outside and never having done it, you see the holes that the people that have been doing it forever or from the jump, like don't see. Like that's how we felt like with founding Girl in the Gov is like, we saw holes and continue to see holes that someone that might be like a total politico that's like so in it doesn't see. And so I think having that diversity of team is so important. And I think that's probably like why the Next 50 has been so successful, because you've been able to actually see that and bring that to the table. And I'm curious too, in terms of like that market hole in founding the organization, like what made you think like, okay, this is the route we're going to solve. This is the spot in the market that like doesn't exist on the Democratic side, because clearly the Republicans have been figuring it out for a while.
Yeah.
Like hate them, but they got it. So
no, it's so true. Look, I was working in the tech industry at the time, and I had so many friends who were coming into means and they wanted to do something, especially in the wake of Trump's election. And I started by directing them towards a series of events that I hosted across the country for presidential candidates. We started with a little known mayor from South Bend, Indiana, which feeds the whole fact that I like finding people before everyone else knows who they are, and ended up hosting 18 presidential candidates across the country. But then the pandemic hit, and interestingly, we had already trained Mayor Pete's team on hosting Zoom fundraisers before you needed to host them. And we, in the process of like transitioning to our pandemic programming, started to host these young down ballot candidates in swing districts across the country and raise as much money for them as we did for the presidential candidates. And the outsized impact that we could have on these down ballot races that were going to impact majorities at the congressional, state legislative, and even municipal levels made us realize as an organization the opportunity we have over the long haul. I always say to folks, political power is not built overnight. It's built over the course of years and decades. And we have this unique privilege as young folks to think on that long time horizon while still recognizing the fierce urgency of now. And, that opportunity to find those folks who, by the way, some of the Next 50's candidates are already running for U.S. Senate, right? Like that's pretty amazing. Some of them, like we backed 3 of the 5 candidates in the most competitive congressional races last cycle. 2 of them won. Like this difference between majorities and having the extreme MAGA Republicans in power, and making sure that this next generation of folks who were like me, working in the tech industry or working in other industries where they're not consumed by politics every day, but can be smarter with how they engage politically, is exactly what you guys are doing with Girl in the Gov. It's what I have chosen to do now as a career path. And in all honesty, it's part of why I'm running for Congress. Like this seat in New York's 3rd congressional district could determine whether or not Leader Jeffries becomes Speaker Jeffries, whether or not Kevin McCarthy and his extreme MAGA Republicans control the House. And, to me, I always try to make decisions that in my life that allow for me to have the greatest impact possible. And again, I never expect this to be it, but this is it.
This is it. No, I'm so curious too. Like you mentioned a little bit, some of the thoughts that you had of like jumping into this race, but I'm curious, like also as a friend, I've been wanting to talk to you about this, like the journey of actually like finally making that decision. Super curious, like first what the steps are and like kind of how you got to like finally making this decision. I think it's also such an important conversation we had if people also are curious about running for office, like what does it take and like how do you like finally get there?
Yeah. So look, I didn't begin the year with the plan to run for Congress. It wasn't always my goal in life. Like my goal in life is not to be a member of Congress.
We were shocked. I'll say
Maybe
that.
when I was 16.
For sure.
Right. A lot of people who I didn't expect to be shocked were shocked. And look, it really began in November of last year. Actually, I would say on Halloween of last year, 7 days before
Spooky.
George Santos. Yeah, very spooky. 7 days before George Santos was elected into Congress, I was standing online for about 30 minutes in my hometown, same town that George Santos represents, the town that my family's lived in for over 60 years, to vote in a library board race. We won this library board election by 7 votes to prevent book banners from taking over our libraries in my hometown, a town that has one of the best public education systems in the entire country, which my grandmother moved to as an immigrant because of that promise of public education. My district, the community that I live in, has about a 20 to 30% immigrant population. Those immigrants move here because of the public education system. But there is a portion of the community now that has been captivated by this politics of fear that's led them to pursuit of banning books and thinking about defunding public education. And, for me, seeing that was the first red flag. The second red flag was George Santos winning a seat that most folks nationally, in the 60 plus years my family's lived here, Republicans only won the seat once. And it was in 1980 during the Reagan Revolution. That candidate only held the office for 2 years. So this is like not a thing that we expected to see happen. And then I got a phone call from some local leaders, and they said to me, Zach, time to put up or shut up. And I'm like, not now, I'm not ready for this. But the more I thought about it, and the more I actually really looked at the field of candidates who were stepping up and were really the same names that have been stepping up most of my life, but unfortunately, recently have been wholesale rejected by the community, the more I realized that we needed something new. We needed something fresh. In some ways, the election of George Santos was an example of the fact that the community was looking for something new and looking for something fresh. They just didn't want someone who was going to be a serial liar and bring shame to the community of F. Scott Fitzgerald, of Judd Apatow, of Natalie Portman, of Aquafina. Like, this district has a lot of history, and now that history is in part stained by George Santos. And so I feel a personal obligation for the community that raised me to come in and bring new life and new energy and new leadership so that we can restore the integrity that I think this community's had for not just the 60 plus years my family's lived here, but the better part of the last century.
Yeah. Well, I think that leads perfectly to the next question, which is sort of like, how did this happen? How did this George Santos shtick go down? Because I remember last year, and even prior to that, us interviewing a bunch of candidates that were running for that seat. I think we were in the Democratic primary phase. So that's how long ago it was in terms of that seat. And then the redistricting stuff happened, and it just was chaos. And we, as ourselves, were okay, it's chaotic. But as I think a lot of New Yorkers are, there's a level of complacency, especially when it's not your district. You're oh, okay, well, it'll go blue because it's New York. And that's very much not the case. So that's a little bit my POV and perspective on it. But I'm curious, from your end, being really in the mix there, what happened? How did this go so wrong? Great for comedy, though. Bad for our lives, but again, great for comedy. So how did it happen?
Stoked.
Yeah.
Well, SNL honestly might be just out of a job at this point because our society is just doing it to itself. Why turn on a TV when you can just step outside? But
my junior prom date actually is on SNL right now. So yeah, Sarah Sherman, she was my neighbor. She grew up up the block. So I think Sarah will probably have something to say about this at some. Look, how did this happen? Well, look, first and foremost, this isn't the first time that the local Republican Party nominated George Santos to run for Congress in this district. It's the second time that they did that. They stood with him, they endorsed him, they took pictures with him until it was no longer convenient for them. And so I think on one hand, you look at the Republican Party here, the extreme MAGA Republicans, and they're complicit. They'll try to pretend that they're, normal, old school, compassionate conservatives. And at the end of the day, they uplifted the MAGA craziness of George Santos as much as anybody. And then, the moment of the pandemic really, again, shifted this community to a politics of fear. I talked about the library race, but it's actually appropriate for me to go back a year prior. In 2021, my town, the town of North Hempstead, for the first time in 30 years had a red wave. I'm 29 years old, so first time in my lifetime had a red wave. And, this is the Democratic heart. Ronald Reagan said this is where Republicans would go to die. Like, this is not the place that Republicans historically would have much success. And yet, because of the way the world changed during the pandemic, this politics of fear took hold, and people who had traditionally not voted for Republicans started to vote for Republicans. And so when they voted for George Santos, I don't believe that people really were voting for George Santos, the what do you work at? Goldman Sachs, the volleyball captain. I mean, all the lies and lies and lies and lies. They voted for him because he was another Republican. They were voting for Republicans. I mean, Chuck Schumer had the worst performance in Nassau County, I think, since the beginning of his career, his Senate career. The governor, Kathy Hochul, lost here to the Republican candidate for governor, Lee Zeldin. This was not a place in 2022 that was favorable toward Democrats. And at the same time, we didn't do the work to earn people's support that we needed to. We didn't have the candidates up that would generate enthusiasm locally, that would allow for us to win. And when you keep putting up the same names time and time again, you get to this level, you referred to it earlier, of complacency that led to Democrats staying at home. In fact, the same number of people, I believe, roughly, voted for the Democratic nominee this cycle as voted in the last cycle when we won the seat. It's Republicans who generated enthusiasm. So that level of complacency definitely took hold. There was this politics of stability, truly, that was the politics of the past. And then now that politics of stability only remained with the core Democratic base and not with the rest of the district. And that's where we are today.
Well, I have another question to that, since, and this could honestly apply like nationwide, because we've been having a lot of conversations with people about how so much of the Democratic vote just stays at home. You could look at Texas, you could look at Florida, and you could look at the registration numbers, and you'll see spots where there's more Democrats registered than Republicans, and yet then the Republicans still win, and they win obviously in the turnout because it's a turnout game in a lot of cases. And I'm curious what your perspective is on Democrats not showing up.
Well, one thing that comes to mind initially is this is where party infrastructure matters so much. I mean, you saw how we won the state Supreme Court race in Wisconsin only back in April, right? I think you covered that. That's because there was a really strong party infrastructure in a state that didn't take winning for granted in place. That's why Michigan, for the first time since 1984, has a trifecta. The Next 50 played a big role in that. And so it's in states like California and New York, in the wake of the Dobbs decision, people didn't feel like their rights were under threat because the complacency, the history of Democrats succeeding and leading and winning really took hold. We need something new here in New York State, perhaps in California, although I don't want to speak to that, Maddie. That might be your wheelhouse. But I know here in New York, it's time to build something new. And I'm not the type of candidate who's saying out with the old, in with the new. I'm the type of candidate who says we need to build together. We need new and fresh ideas. And we also need the folks who know how the ship's been built to rebuild this place. And that's what I'm committed to as a candidate, is running for office as somebody who is going to bring fresh and new ideas, who knows what it's like to win in competitive places and build the infrastructure to win in competitive places. Doesn't take this place for granted, doesn't take his hometown for granted, doesn't take his leadership and his community for granted whatsoever, knows we have to go out and earn every single vote, and we can't stop just when we're in cycle. We have to do it when we're out of cycle. We have to do it year in and year out. This is a diverse community for what it's worth. We're talking about a district that right now has 15% Asian population, 10% Latino population, 5% Black population. within the rest of the district, you have a pretty heavy Middle Eastern population, the largest Persian Jewish population in the country outside of Beverly Hills. And so this community is not your traditional or perceived to be traditional white suburban swing district.
Right.
And so we need to invest in the diversity of this district. We need to make sure that we have Asian American organizing groups and efforts. We need Latino organizing efforts in this community. And there hasn't been much of an investment in that. And as this community changed, by the way, an immigrant organizing effort here, because there's a roughly 20 to 30% immigrant population. This is the stuff they did in Georgia that allowed for Senator Warnock and Senator Ossoff to be elected. We need to be doing that here in Nassau County and in Northeast Queens and across New York State.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to talk about your campaign video that came out a little bit. It was the perfect mix of like some subtle shade to, George Santos, but also just like highlight like who you are. You came from this district, like you, and kind of highlighted how literally the life that George Santos created was similar to yours, which is just so ironic and funny. But I'm curious to like your perspective on how the George Santos thing even happened, like talking about the complacency of voters. I mean, was there just a complacency across the board from like the party to even the press of like actually vetting this guy and, getting into the weeds of like who he really was? I'm just still so mind blown that all of this just completely got looked over.
It was a wholesale failure from the party to the media. I mean, this was not, again, this wasn't the first time he was nominated by the Republican Party for Congress. This was the second time. People knew what was going on and they didn't act. They didn't raise the alarm. And, I think, look, ultimately I'm running as a Democrat for Congress. And so I think we have to own our role in this as a party. And at the same time, make sure that we're calling out the Republicans for the fact that they are responsible for nominating this guy not once, but twice to be a representative of Congress, in Congress. And people are suffering right now because he's in Congress. We don't have somebody who can perform basic constituent services for our community. That's devastating for this place that is struggling right now because, our dollar does not go as far right now as it did before the pandemic with rising inflation. We don't have the SALT deduction here. That's a big deal in this district. And so, now that George Santos is a member of Congress, everyone wants to blame another person for why we are where we are. I don't believe that this is the community that anybody really wants to be living in with a member of Congress like George Santos representing them. But people need to take responsibility for what took place. And at this point, I don't see a single person, Republican, Democrat, in the media, who's actually taken responsibility for George Santos being in the position he's in right now, who's essentially holding our community hostage. That's a problem. That's a real problem. And I didn't see anybody willing to step up to make sure that we held the folks accountable who put us in this place to start with. And that's a big reason why I'm doing this, because I don't see anybody stepping up who has the confidence, who has the commitment to make sure that we don't let our community continue to be stained by the legacy of George Santos. We got to wipe that clean and restore the integrity that this district has had for the past century. The failure is wholesale and it's across the board. And I hope to build a new legacy on top of that.
Yeah, no, totally. And that is such a good point of like no one sort of stepping up to the plate to like take accountability for how we got here. It's a lot of, and look, we're guilty of it too. Of like, oh my God, did you see this next new lie? This is the most absurd thing I've ever heard, yada, yada, yada. But like, there isn't a lot of conversation about how we got there, which is kind of like why we're even having this conversation about it. Because it seems confusing to most people. And then you get distracted by the next lie and, you forget about those questions, right? And like
Trump, then you just start like ignoring all the lies because it just keeps on going and going and going. And then you tune it out and become immune to it. It's not where we can.
Yeah. Well, it's the sign of a good con man. The more lies you spend, the more distracted people get, the further you can go because you have all these smoke screens up. So like, not to give him any credit, but the guy's not so bad at being a con man. He's got like his ducks in a row. Like him and Trump definitely like do a little collab, a little moment. I see it. So
Yeah, I'd like for my community to not be represented by a really skilled con man.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think we need to also talk about the issues you're running on too, right? Like, in addition to sort of wiping the slate clean and bringing a new era into, into the 21st century here for your district, like what issues are at the forefront for you? Like, what are like the two things you're like, this needs to happen. I want to make sure this happens in Congress.
Well, look, I always bring it back to the fact that my grandmother moved here as an immigrant over 60 years ago to raise her family here because of the promise of public education. And I think it's important that we make this campaign that centers itself on the value of public education while it is so apparently under threat here. In fact, the day after I launched my campaign, I was at my administrative building for my school district until 4 a.m. waiting for the votes to be counted for our school budget race and our school board elections. And we won. But those votes were challenged time and time again by extreme MAGA Republicans here. And I want to make sure that this community takes a stand, that we are a proud pro-public education community and district. On top of that, though, we also need to be pro-public safety. And actually that intersects with our schools. First and foremost, the first trip I ever made to Albany was to advocate for gun safety with my then Assemblywoman, Michelle Schimmel, and New Yorkers Against Gun Violence in 2009. Unfortunately, 11 years later, at the dawn of the pandemic, I lost a friend to gun violence. And so to me, these issues of public education and public safety are deeply personal. And it actually even intersected with my school district only 2 weeks ago when folks intruded into my high school, the high school I grew up in that I went to, with a plan to attack a student. 6 people entered the school with a plan to attack a student. Like, no student should go to school every day fearing for their safety.
Right.
So we need to prioritize that. And at the same time, recognize that as young people who want to build the families that my mother and my father have been able to build for in this community, that my grandmother was able to move here with my grandfather and raise a family here, we need to make sure that the American dream is affordable and accessible to all. And the idea of really prioritizing and building a campaign around cost of living is central to me, because if people can't afford to live out the American dream in this district, then what are we in this for? Are we here to grandstand on issues? Like, we have to bring this back to kitchen table issues.
Yeah.
And the last thing I'll just say, I'm running to be a next generation member of Congress. We don't need someone elected to Congress who's going to be asking, what is the Facebook and how does the Facebook make money? And so I want to make sure that as a member of Congress, I'm able to prepare my community for the 21st century workforce that is being radically reshaped by artificial intelligence. And I'm familiar with that. I'm aware of it. I have friends who are building some of the leading companies in the field. And this is a community of lawyers, doctors, and finance professionals. Those industries are going to be disrupted by this. And we need somebody who's prepared to work on the front lines of preparing this community for the changing economy. So that, our schools are preparing students for the 21st century, so people are safe to live in this community, and third, they're able to afford to live out that American dream here.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, you present like an interesting point in that we need to have people that actually understand how technology works and what things are happening. So there's actually a conversation last night kind of about this, in the essence of like, in our society, we have certain things that are so ahead and other things that are so behind. And it's almost like, depending on what sector you're in, you could be living in 1950 or you could be living in like 3600, like whatever you want to call it. Yeah. And when you look at Congress in a lot of ways, it's like, oh my God, like I'm shocked they're not still wearing, white wigs and the whole getup. And then when you go to think about like tech and you're like AI, you're like, oh my God, robots taking over the world. So you have like such extremes, and like trying to put those two together doesn't always mesh or work. And trying to actually have people that understand at least the middle ground of that, I think, is really key. And young people that have grown up as digital natives, in a lot of ways, I think definitely is a part of that conversation. Right. And so I'm curious too, like if that's been something that you've heard on the campaign trail, like in talking to people, like, are they concerned about technology? Are they concerned about AI? Like, I know like it creeps me the fuck out personally, but like curious, like what you're hearing.
It's not an immediate concern, truth be told. Okay. I think this is a matter of having a vision for what this community and district can become. And as long as I've lived here, I've never been around political leaders who actually presented a vision for what the future of this community could be. We always talked about our history and we never talked about our future. And I want to be someone who is centering my leadership around our future, that gives us something to look toward and look and build for. And, do that all while recognizing the urgent priorities of today, preserving public education and people's public safety. And so I think that in being this next generation leader, I'm not just going to represent the interests of this community for the next 2 years. I'm going to be representing this community's interests for the next 50 years. I guess we're coming full circle here, but that's really what I'm in this for. We have to be building for the future. Otherwise, we're going to be fighting this battle with another George Santos or someone like George Santos coming up again in 10 or 15 years. And we're going to do this all over again. So we need to be building for something, building towards something. I want people to come to this community and say, like, we're going to be the next this, or we're going to be the next that. We're building for something, not we were the place of the Great Gatsby.
Right.
I want to be the place that's going to become something still and isn't living in its past.
For sure. I love that. Well, you're not the only Democrat in this race currently. So can you kind of paint that picture too? We know the George Santos part of it, but let's talk about this Democratic primary. Like, what's the rundown on all of that?
Well, I'll just start with an electoral case. And it's that, unfortunately, everybody else who is putting their hat into the ring or is considering putting their hat into the ring has been wholesale rejected by this community over the last couple of years. Whether they lost substantially in a Democratic primary or they lost by about 8 points in a general election, these are risks that we can't afford to take. If we're going to win this seat back, restore integrity to this district, and also make sure that Leader Jeffries becomes Speaker Jeffries. And right now, I think that being a new candidate and a fresh face isn't a risk because we saw it work last cycle on the other side. So why don't we try something like that on this side, but know that this time we're going to run a candidate who has integrity, who knows what it takes to win in a seat like this, and who's of the community, from the community, and is running on the values of the community, because those are the values that raised me. And so as I look at this field, I know that I'm the person who's best positioned to win this seat in a general election, hands down. There's no question about that. But we have to do the work to earn people's support because I am running as a first-time candidate. And that means that we have to show up. We have to get out there. We also have to raise the resources to be a successful campaign. And that's why raising over $225,000 in our first 24 hours put our campaign on the map. We talked about the Next 50 right early on in this call. And one of the things that the Next 50 really stands for is making sure that people not having access to a donor network doesn't inhibit their ability to lead. I'm fortunate to have built a community of folks who are ready to invest in this campaign. But it's going to take a lot more to build a campaign that can run and win. Right now, we're off to an amazing start. But I fully believe that this campaign, as we continue to build our case and get out there, is going to be one that excites people, like generates enthusiasm, and will have the resources to deliver a victory for the community, for the Democratic Party locally, for the Democratic Party nationally, and will wipe this district clean of the stain that is George Santos.
Yeah.
A stain.
Yeah, like Clorox bleach is not getting that out. It's going to take something like a little grittier, but I think you're definitely the person to do it. In terms of getting involved with your campaign, right? Helping build that infrastructure, getting into it all. What can people do? How can they help? How can they learn more? Give us the whole tea.
ZakForCongress.com is the place to go. And you can follow Zak for Congress on Instagram or Zak Malamed on Twitter. To learn more. From time to time, you'll see me going around the block and sharing a selfie video on what I've learned that day or the issues that are facing my community. I'll try to ramp that up in the weeks and months ahead. But also, if folks are in the New York City area ever, which I imagine a handful of your followers are, we are the first suburb outside of well, technically 20 to 30% of my district is in Queens. So we're actually still in the city. We're really close. We're really accessible. 20-minute train ride from the heart of the city. If you want to come and volunteer and get involved, we'd love to have you. And then, of course, you can go to ZakForCongress.com right now and chip in whatever you can, because right now a campaign is only as viable as the resources that we have to build out and build our volunteer infrastructure. So I would love for folks to get involved, help elevate the campaign. We're 12 months away from the primary, so there's a long haul ahead of this. I'm looking forward to touching base with you in a couple months and talking about the work we're doing on the ground to get people's support. But right now, we're building the campaign that will allow for us to win. I'm excited to take those learnings back to you and all the young candidates the Next 50 supported too, so that all these folks can learn from our successes and our mistakes and build great campaigns with them.
Amazing. Well, we're so proud of you, Zak. This is going to be so exciting to watch. And thank you for finally coming on the show.
Thanks for finally inviting me.
No, you're always welcome here. But thank you again.
No, thank you both. And thanks to your whole community of followers and listeners for the work that they're doing to stay involved. It's what we need to win the House, win the presidency in 2024, and keep the Senate. So thank you all. And the state legislatures and all of that. We've got a lot of work to do.
All the things.
All the things.